Hello, my name is Melissa Galasso, and today we're going to talk about the first ASU issued in 2023. It is an important ASU that was much asked for by private companies. This is something that the FASB heard a lot of feedback from private companies, particularly at the Engage conference when they were holding the private company town hall. And I think they heard enough of the feedback that they decided to do something with it. So on March 27th, the FASB issued ASU 2023-01, and which is common control arrangements falling under topic 842, which is leases. And so as we take a look at this, this is an important concept because, as you can probably imagine, people were really struggling with some of the language around, in particular, these common control leases or related party leases under common control. In private company areas, it could be that it is a husband leasing to a wife or a parent leasing to a child. Frequently, these leases are not in writing. They do not have the same amount of, documentation. They have been around forever. Nobody really knows what's going on. They're not seen as really formal legal contracts. And unfortunately, the language in topic 842 says you still have to evaluate related party leases and determine whether they are legally enforceable. And people felt like this would require potentially legal consultation. They were definitely concerned with what was required to be in writing versus not in writing. In many states, leases do not necessarily have to be in writing to be enforceable in many, many states. And so this was starting to become a real issue for them because they're like, look, we can renegotiate these terms at any time, right? This party is related to me. It's under common control. And so as a result, the FASB heard a lot of feedback and decided to address that feedback. And so when we think about legally enforceable terms and conditions, right, people felt like they were going to have to either go out and get a lot of legal opinions, or they were going to have to make assumptions that they weren't necessarily comfortable with in terms of treating it for accounting purposes. And so issue one here is for private companies and most not-for-profit organizations, right? You can't do this if you are a nonprofit with conduit debt because you've already adopted the standard. When we look at ASU 2016-02, they actually adopted the standard at the same time as public entities. In addition, if you're an employee benefit plan and you file with the SEC, then you also are deemed to be public. And again, you've already adopted that standard. So this is not for you, but it is for private entities and nonprofits without conduit debt. And what it's going to do is going to provide a practical expedient. The practical expedient is going to help us determine whether a lease exists and what the classification of that lease would be and what the related counted is based on the written terms and conditions. So you're probably saying, Melissa, you just told us that these aren't in writing. This was basically a carrot that the FASB gave to private companies. And for example, they could simply enter into a single one-year lease. One-year leases are excluded from topic 842, so long as in the following year they enter into a single one-year lease. So these do have to be in writing. If they aren't in writing, they're not eligible for the practical expedient. But if they are in writing, you would simply follow the terms and conditions. You would not have to look at implied items. You would not have to try to evaluate if they were legally enforceable. You would simply say, what are the terms written down? Let me go take a look and see what is the definition of a lease. Is this classification and what is the accounting based on just those written terms? And it can be done on an arrangement by arrangement basis. And so again, the goal here is to make this as easy as possible. So it is sort of a carrot to help encourage people to put these in writing. However, if you choose not to put them in writing, then there is no practical expedient and you must follow the terms and conditions in topic 842. Now, there is a nice transition here as well. So when we look at this, FASB did make this effective for fiscal years beginning after December 15, 2023, and interim periods within those fiscal years, meaning that this is actually not technically effective until 2024. Right, in terms of the effective date, right? It was issued in March of 2023. Now, the effective date for topic 842 was December of 2022, right? So we are about 3 months after the technical implementation of leases. But if you've talked to any CPA firms recently, they will tell you that many of them were holding financial statements and not issuing them because they knew that this was coming and they wanted to be able to use written terms and conditions instead of the implied terms and all of the evaluation. And so when they wrote this, it is permitted for interim and annual periods that have not yet been made available for issuance. And I think that's really important here. And what I also thought was really important was the guidance they gave around transition, which was regardless of the entity's transition approach, you could still permit to put any existing unwritten terms and conditions into writing before you do this, and it would qualify. So long as you make those unwritten terms written prior to issuing your financial statements, even for your 2022 year ends, then again, in this scenario, it would still meet the requirements for the practical expedient. So not written, at the point when this was issued, but they took the time to put it in writing before they issued the financial statements, then you can use those terms and conditions. So I think that's really important. But this standard doesn't just address issue 1, it obviously also addresses issue number 2. And issue number 2 really relates to leasehold improvements. This was another feedback they got. So obviously, if you have any leasehold improvements with these entities under common control, if you do reduce the lease term down to 1 year, right, this might have a negative impact on your leasehold improvements because leasehold improvements are supposed to be amortized over the shorter of the lease term or the useful life. And so if you write down your lease term to 1 year, then in that scenario, you should be writing off all of your leasehold improvements. And a lot of people felt like that was not consistent with the true economics of the arrangement because honestly, at the end of the day, the lessor is going to get back these leasehold improvements. And 2, when we take a look at this, the reason why we're putting them in for 1 year is just because they're so related that we just don't know. And so they felt like to have the lease, present value all of these payments where we're just not really sure. Whereas for the leasehold improvements, we know that the asset has a longer useful life and it knows that either the lessee or the lessor is going to get the benefit. And so as a result, there was a discussion around, well, what would be the right way to deal with this? And so what they did in issue number 2 is that they are going to require leasehold improvements that are recognized by a lessee be amortized over the shorter of the remaining, the process as we go through this, when we look at this would be that this is the problem. And the scope of this one's actually more interesting because in the application of this, public companies somehow got scoped into this. So because they said, well, theoretically, this is the right treatment, regardless of the type of entity you are, that the leaseholds really, because they are under common control, they're going to go back and forth between the lessee and the lessor who are common control. And so this is all lessees that are related, that are party to a lease between entities under common control, in which the lessee is the owner of leasehold improvements. That includes public companies, private companies, and not-for-profit organizations. So again, this is all entities are under issue number 2. So private companies get issue number 1. All companies are subject to issue number 2, which is we're now going to amortize our leasehold improvements over the useful life of the leasehold improvement. Now, I think this is important. They did change the language here. Originally, it did use the term economic life, and they changed it to useful life to be consistent with the treatment under Topic 360 for property, plant, and equipment. The leaseholds would be amortized, or leasehold improvements would be subject to the impairment testing under Topic 360. And so the useful life of the leasehold improvement, regardless of the lease term. And so basically, so long as the lessee controls the underlying asset, they are allowed to continue to just do it over the useful life. And then if we were to end early, for example, we would have an adjusting entry. And so if we were to think about this, if we had a transfer between entities under common control, we would do that adjustment through equity or net assets if you're a not-for-profit, if the lessee no longer controls the use. So say, we're amortizing it over useful life of 20 years, but like 3 years later, we're done using this asset and we move on to another item. now we're going to transfer it back basically to the lessor, and we're going to do that as I said, an equity adjustment. And so I think this is, more representative of the economics as we go through this. So again, these leasehold improvements are going to be subject to impairment guidance in Topic 360, property, plant, and equipment. And issue 2 is also effective for fiscal years beginning after December 15th, including interim periods within those years. And early adoption is also still permitted for interim and annual financials that have not yet been issued. So if you want to adopt this all together, you absolutely can. All right, that was quite a bit to cover, but hopefully that gave you a nice update on what's going on in ASU 2023-01, Leases under Common Control.